How do data leaders drive innovation across the entire organization? What steps can data leaders take to create maximum internal engagement? And most importantly, how can you connect all of this to revenue? In this episode of Data Humanized, we'll discuss how innovation is powered by data literacy with Target's Senior Vice President of Data Sciences, Brad Thompson. Welcome to Data Humanized, presented by Correlation One. In each episode, we'll bring you the unique perspective of enterprise leaders at the intersection of technology and humanity who are leading cultural transformation through the power of data. You'll also hear the real-life stories of learners who have graduated from the Data Skills for All program and who are embarking on new career pathways, creating a more inclusive, collaborative, and effective workforce. I'm your host, Mark Palmer. Please visit the Correlation One website for more about how data literacy transforms enterprises, and tell your friends about the Data Humanized podcast. AI is powering major innovation across all industries and all functions. Research from McKinsey found that companies that invest in AI experience revenue gains of up to 15%, with return on investment gains as high as 20%. And we're just getting started with AI. But companies still aren't equipping their workers with the AI skills they need. A survey from Correlation One found that just 26% of enterprises prioritize AI in their upskilling programs. So when centralized data teams build cool new AI applications, how can leaders ensure that internal customers like commercial or ops teams drive ROI from these innovations? Today, we're speaking with Brad Thompson, Senior Vice President of Data Science at Target. We'll learn how he leads collaboration between his data team, app development, and the broader organization, and how Target enables digital skills growth across its workforce. Please enjoy my conversation with Brad. All right. Hi, Brad. Welcome to Data Humanized. I thought we'd start off with maybe just giving us an idea of how you wound up at Target. U.S. listeners will obviously know about the retailer, your top 10 in the United States, and actually I think top 10 in the world. But for folks abroad or in Asia that might be listening, give us an idea of Target and why you went there. It's been 20 years, but how did you get there?
Yeah, it has been 20 years at Target. I joined in 2004, and at the time, Target was something like a $60 billion retailer, and so it's been super fun to be a part of the growth journey over the last 20 years to be in over $100 billion now, and I've seen us go through just tremendous changes as e-commerce as a channel, obviously totally disrupted retail at in the early 2000s, and just watching our journey there. Why Target? Target is kind of the best of both worlds in terms of working in retail where everything changes really, really fast. So at times it can feel like you're working for a small company because you have to be nimble, you have to respond to the consumer's needs. You're also competing against some of the best and most powerful companies in the world, which keeps you on your toes. But on the other hand, you're working for a very large company that's got resources behind it, that when it makes a decision that it wants to go after a strategy, it can be aggressive about pursuing that. And so it's just been fun to be a part of it. It's also one of the preeminent employers in the Twin Cities, and I was living in the Twin Cities at the time and coming out of graduate school at the University of Minnesota. So it was a destination for me, and I'm glad they gave me a shot.
What is the most impactful change or shift you've actually seen over that? From six, it's so funny to hear you casually say from 60 billion to over 100 billion now. That's a lot of billions, right? So what's changed in that time? That's maybe perhaps the most remarkable to you.
Yeah, I mean, I would say for sure it's been the role of digital shopping over that time period. And I would say we were probably not as aggressive as some of our competitors about grappling with the channel shift. We've been very successful for a very long time in stores. People love our stores; they love to shop in our stores. And I think for a long time, that mentality prevented us from being maybe as aggressive as others in sort of recognizing and trying to capitalize on the shift to online channels. But once we got serious about it, it became a lot of fun to figure out how to integrate both the digital channels and the store channels. And we were one of the first companies to really make omni-channel shopping come to life with buying online and picking up in store through offering ship from store as a fulfillment channel, and then also drive up as well. I would say, very aggressive early on about being America's most convenient place to shop through all of the different fulfillment channels that we had available to us. And for a while, it was a real competitive advantage for us. Some of our competitors have copied some of those capabilities over time. But at the time, I was in charge of a lot of the store technology and development of store technology. And it was a blast to build the first, second, and third generation of tools used by team members in the stores to fulfill orders. At the time, we didn't have the capability to ship anything out the back of a store to a guest's house. And so figuring out how to pick, how to pack, how to manifest, and then how to deal with drive up and fulfilling orders out in the parking lot. It was a fascinating technology challenge along with a rapidly evolving business strategy.
It's funny. Sometimes I talk to my kids about .coms and they don't know what that means, right? And
Right?
I imagine they probably a lot of people would think the same about that experience that they didn't realize that just didn't always exist. So
Wasn't all it always wasn't that way, right? Yeah, for
we'll
sure.
talk about you're the senior vice president of data sciences. What does that mean at Target?
Yeah, and my role has actually expanded a little bit even in the last few weeks. I also have responsibility for application development in stores and supply chain and finance, HR, and some other enterprise services, and the data sciences for those areas as well. What that means is that I have the fortune of leading a large group of application developers and data scientists that build technology solutions that help us run our stores, that help us run our supply chain, that provide tools to our team members inside Target to serve the guest, to run our headquarters locations. And we apply technology to lots of business problems in those areas. We are the second largest importer in the United States. Not a lot of people know that, only behind Walmart. And so we have a massive, massive supply chain, and it requires a lot of technology. It requires a lot of machine learning to optimize our supply chain operations. And so the data scientists, they spend a lot of time building machine learning models to simulate some of our supply chain capabilities, to look for ways to optimize decisions that we make in stores and supply chain. And so that's what it means to run that kind of an organization. Is that you hire really passionate technologists, you give them access to world class technologies, you make sure that they've got well worn paths to partner and collaborate with their business process owners. And then you sort of stand back and see what they can build on behalf of the guest and our team members.
It's pretty progressive to hear that that you really have a single view of data science and applications too. I mean, in a lot of companies they have like sort of like the data scientists off in the laboratory, right? Like thinking
Yeah.
great thoughts, and then you've got the people building operational applications, and but you've got uh, some responsibility for both, which is pretty cool.
Yeah, we've decided that it is a priority for us to better integrate data scientists and the models they build with the applications, our line of business applications, and bring the machine learning models into the applications where the users already are. I think
Mhm.
the more separate they are, you start to have challenges with adoption of decision sciences. But if you can get those decision scientists or the recommendations or the outputs of those models integrated into the applications, then they start to become easier to consume. And it's one less step for the users to actually interact with the data. So we structurally try to make it easy for the scientists and the application developers to work together, and remove any impediments or barriers to that cooperation and collaboration.
So talk more about that. How do you set up that kind of an organization where, is it a combination of centralized versus decentralized? How do you
Yeah.
get those application teams close to the data scientists and sort of encourage collaboration in a tight knit relationship there? How do you think about organization?
Yeah. So organizationally, um, you know, as a forcing function, reporting into the same leader, if you've got, let's say a vice president of application development for stores, and you've got a vice president of decision sciences or data sciences for stores, if they report to the same person, there is a strong vested interest to make sure that they are collaborating and cooperating in building out solutions, making sure that as those teams work with product owners to define what the user experience is going to be, to define the outcomes that the applications and the models need to produce. It just, having a common leadership takes away a lot of the possibility for one team to have one set of priorities and the other team to have a different set of priorities, and then you spend a lot of time dealing with the friction in the organization that can create. So I think organizationally you can create common alignment, common incentives just through the way that you structure yourself. Now, it's still important, though, for there to be a lot of collaboration with the users of the applications, the product managers that are responsible for stewarding those products and those applications. Oftentimes, at least at Target, they don't necessarily sit in the same organization. We've centralized our technology for the most part. We've centralized our data science function for the most part. And it still becomes important for me to have really strong partnerships with those business process owners to understand day in and day out the challenges they face, what their priorities are, and make sure that how we spend our time in the technology organization is in service to their priorities rooted in our business strategy at Target.
That's obviously the title of this is Data Humanized. So it's all about like how do you make that link with skills and sort of competency around data and that link that you have with your business users. How do you facilitate that at Target? Like,
Yeah.
how do you help them? How do you
Mhm.
upskill your? I mean, you're a massive organization, right? So how do you make sure everybody at least has that same level, that bar of understanding of how to apply not just data, but like, I mean, my gosh, our machine learning, artificial intelligence. How do you think about that at Target?
We've got lots of different mechanisms, different tools that people can use. We provide access to things like hackathons. We have something that we call demo days, which is a big technologist showing and telling other technologists, but also business users of things that they have under development. And those are some of the mechanisms. But I would say one of the most important parts of upskilling is creating a culture where continuous learning is the expectation and creating a culture where there is time set aside for people to actually invest in their learning journey. So we have something here that we call 50 days of learning. And it is basically a commitment from the management team to our team members that they are empowered to spend up to 50 days a year, 20% of their time investing in their learning and their learning journey. That can take many forms. It can take the form of participating in a hackathon. It could take the form of going to an industry conference. It can take the form of listening to podcasts, all in service to skills development, learning about trends that are happening in technology, learning about new languages that maybe they want to build in, new types of architecture, even business strategies and problems to help the technologists better connect to what Target is trying to achieve as a company.
I love the 50 days of learning. It's just such it's an easy thing to remember. It's also probably pretty easy for people to track. Is it totally self-directed or I mean, obviously you create
Yeah.
things like hackathons to help facilitate it. And hey, guess what? We've got a podcast to add to the list here. But how do you go about making that scale and be like directed so that they're finding the right things that you think are missing to service the organization?
Yeah, we encourage in the area of like career development, we encourage each team member, like in this case, technologists in my organization, for them to have a development plan, and that development plan is something that they work out with their boss. Where they have a strong point of view on the ways they should be investing their time in continuous learning, the kinds of topics that they want to pursue and learn about. Obviously, their boss is going to be a partner in that conversation, and they're going to come to some agreement on what that learning plan should look like. And it's going to be informed by and influenced by, say, the product roadmap for the products that they support and that they're building against. It might be informed by trends that are happening in the industry. But it ends up being a conversation. The artifact, the development plan, is really just a tool to help facilitate the conversation. But it's ultimately a partnership between the team member and their boss. But we want the team member to have a very, very strong say in that conversation. We don't want it to be directed to them. We want them to have a strong point of view on the right things that they think they need to learn about in service to the things that Target wants to accomplish.
Yep. No, I like the individualized with managers. That's always been, I think, it's always great to know, like, well, okay, where are your gaps, and then what do you want to fill the gaps? And I love the idea of mapping it to your product roadmap as well. And again, that happens at sort of the management level. Is that how I would imagine that is? Like, we've got these projects to work on. This one requires some, I don't know, advanced machine learning. So let's set that as a goal. Is that kind of how it works?
Exactly. You might look at, say, the product roadmap for the next 6 months and say, given where this product is going to go, or given the specific features that are on the backlog, do we need to make an investment in new skills development? Are we going to be re-architecting this platform, this product, and therefore do we need to invest in these skills? Or it might be just the manager looking at the sum total of the skill mix on their team and saying, I think I need to have at least a small percentage of my team that's like looking farther out and developing some skills that I think maybe are farther out on the time horizon. Any and all of that, I think, is possible. There's also going to be just a certain amount of time that is spent just researching and trying things that maybe don't have near term applicability, but are just going to be about satisfying curiosity, about continuing to like spark innovation and creative thinking. So I don't want to imply that everything we do is sort of rooted in it's got to be applied in the next 6 months or it doesn't matter. You have to leave some room for people to really just kind of get crazy and try stuff that they've never tried before.
I love the balance. I mean, I really do think that. So, especially with what's going on now with generative AI, which of course we'll get to a little bit later. But there's just every day there's sort of something new to say. Well, what is that thing even?
Yeah.
Right? It's got a very, very nicely balanced view of that sort of development. And what about mentorship? Do you have anything systematic that you do there and facilitate that, like, and within the organization? Because again, it's got, to scale this out, that's always that's something that a bunch of folks talk about.
It is. We encourage mentorship. I think a lot of big best in class companies will encourage mentorship. And because we ask our leaders of people, managers, to have periodic development conversations, that's our language, development conversation, with their team members. Oftentimes a team member will ask for suggestions for a good mentor, or maybe even a supervisor will have a suggestion for a mentor. If a team member is trying to work on a particular skill and there's some experts in the organization, they will try and match people up and have mentorship. Even if you're an individual contributor, you don't lead people, but you're like say a principal scientist or you're a principal engineer. It is expected that you are mentoring people in the organization. And that mentorship can take a couple of different forms. It can be a formal relationship where, there's a regular cadence of meetings. The mentee is expected to show up with topics to talk about, but it can also be highly informal. It can be more ad hoc. Somebody's got a question, or there's a thread that they want to pull on and they want to run it by a subject matter expert. And so they have a conversation that if you were eavesdropping on it, it might seem like a mentor-mentee conversation, but maybe it's just totally ad hoc and that relationship's not going to endure. But that's okay. That's, sometimes that can be a highly effective interaction. There's also, we'll do things like as we do code reviews or other routines that are very normal in the development process, you'll find the more senior technical staff kind of giving advice, coaching, feedback, code, or architecture or design, and all of that is part of the mentoring process. Sometimes we will have people be mentors if it is their aspiration to someday lead people and they are trying to get experience in order to qualify themselves for supervisor roles or leaders of people roles. We will ask them to mentor several people so that they start to build the muscle of giving coaching and advice and feedback to individual contributors. So that can be a bridge sometimes to a leadership role, is by taking on mentees as a mentor. And then sometimes we will have what we'll call like more sponsored mentorship and development programs where, maybe you identify somebody who's high potential, and you want to pair them up with somebody that to give them more exposure. That probably is a little less about mentorship, and maybe that's more about advocacy or sponsorship. But we definitely see that playing a role in the organization as well.
Awesome. Awesome. It's such a good conversation about mentorship. And I love your bridge to management as well. I mean, it's so often people just, okay, well, you're ready to be a manager. Let's go. Right. But
Exactly.
spending some time coaching and mentoring is a fantastic idea. Well, let's talk. We've gone through probably half of our time here, not talked about generative AI, which is
Yeah.
remarkable for any podcast nowadays.
Right.
Let's talk generative AI. And,
Okay.
how do you see it in the retail industry? My gosh, you've got an amazing position in being able to see what's going on there and obviously inside of Target. I mean, how do you view it on the spectrum of, well, maybe first on the spectrum of hype to reality and also like sort of what you see as a pragmatic, tool for business impact in the retail industry.
Yeah. So earlier, when you asked me about, one of the biggest changes that I had seen, and I talked about the development of e-commerce, that was my answer only because Gen AI is still in chapter one. I think,
Mhm.
you know, 5 years from now, looking back on this conversation, the answer to a question would be generative AI. It is going to have massive and seismic impacts on all industries, but retail is not exempt from that.
Mhm.
Retailers, so retail as a business vertical is a really fun place to be a data scientist, a data analyst, or anybody working with data, because retailers sit on vast amounts of data, whether it's supply chain data, our operations data, but also interactions with their customers and all the data that spawns transaction data. We have lots of data. It's like being a kid in a candy store if you're a data scientist. Generative AI because there are so many interactions with the consumer, whether that is through help and chat, whether that is through a contact center, post order, whether that is just perusing a website for inspiration, shopping inspiration. There's so many interaction points, and therefore so many opportunities to make an automated interaction much more humanized, which generative AI is very, very good at. It's very good at taking, at obviously, an understanding sentiment, parsing nuance, using language, regardless of which language, but using language to talk back talk back to a human, in a way that feels very natural. It's so good at that retailers would be crazy not to be thinking about every single interaction point where they've had to, because of scale, put a very deterministic chatbot in place to try and automate some tasks. Now there's an opportunity to bring a human element to that. Well, I say human element, something that feels like more of a human element to that through generative AI. So I think it will have a very, very big impact on the way retailers do retail. But it's also going to have a very big impact on the way shoppers shop. So I tend to put, when we talk about use cases for generative AI inside of Target, there's obviously the use cases for us about how we perform retail operations, how we interact with our guests. But I think we also need to be thinking about, where is generative AI going? how it's going to change people's lives and how it's going to change the way they interact with all sorts of organizations, whether that's nonprofit organizations, government organizations, for profit organizations. It's going to be seismic. And every organization needs to think about, how do I want to interact with my customers now and in the future? So generative AI will be really, really big for retail, but it will also be really big for every industry.
So, give us an idea of. I mean, there's some obvious challenges there. I like to talk about the Samsung, blunder, right, where engineers put
Yeah,
documentation up into a public chat engine. There's a lot of like issues, of course, about privacy of data. But but what's your view on some of the bigger challenges? You're a kid in the candy store of data. There, you've got access to all this, but and of course, my gosh, prompt-based interfaces ca is transformational, right? So,
it is.
but
Yeah.
how do you think about the challenges there?
Yeah.
Have you thought about have you been running hackathons? Did you find something there surprising in your exploration? I know some of the stuff you're probably doing is pretty secretive, but I mean, give us a sense for where you find the likely biggest payoffs
Yeah.
are going to be.
There's a lot to unpack there. That's a big question. Here's what was going through my head as you asked that question. So first of all, like any new technology, you have to train and teach people, and you have to understand that they are going to make some mistakes. But when it comes to using something like a chat GPT or Bard or anything else, you do have to let people know, hey, here's the kind of information that it's okay to include, say, in your prompts, and here's absolutely the information that you can't. And we do some of that training, but we that's no different than the way we train people on any kind of
Mhm.
cloud-based technology. Is there's just certain confidential information that we don't want you to include. But there's also some things that choices you can make on the back end to sort of help keep the user safe, so that if they do make a mistake, the impact and exposure to the company is relatively limited. So there are some choices that you can make, and the way those tools are configured, the way you maybe even sort of license the technology from companies, you can put some guardrails in place that keep you safer, which has been helpful. But you got to train people. The other thing about training people is we have found that prompt engineering, it is a real skill set. It's a mindset. One of our early forays into like using generative AI as a coding companion for some of our engineers, you would think, okay, technologists, software developers, they're going to be super savvy on how to interact with this technology. But one of the things that we discovered is that a lot of them were just sort of thinking about it as like a super Google. If I have a question about how to code something, or if I have a question about how to get started in a language, I can ask it a question. And a lot of people weren't thinking of it as an actual tool that you could ask it to perform tasks for you, to help to like actually write code for you that you could then troubleshoot and debug. And so we had to teach them that it's not just a place to go ask questions; it is a companion that you can put to work, doing work for you. And that wasn't immediately intuitive to everybody. So we had to sort of teach them the art of possible, all the things that it was capable of doing. And that was just with our software developers. Now, as you go into other functions, the need to sort of teach them that it's basically a digital intern at your disposal. Everybody now potentially has an intern that they can give work to, as long as it's the kind of work that you're comfortable putting into a chat interface. Um, but most people just aren't comfortable having an intern. They've never had an intern at their disposal before. So I would say you can't underestimate the need to teach people all the things that they can do with it, and to really get them to think creatively about it. So that's been one lesson that I think we're learning. And we haven't solved that yet. We're still on that journey. We still have a long way to go to fully educate our team here on how to get the most out of tools like that. I would say, let's see, other surprises. The last thing is as our technologists have started to build and integrate LLM based solutions into our line of business applications, we've just been a little bit surprised at how fast you can build now and create some of these experiences. The power of having these large foundational models that are pre-trained, just sitting there waiting with an API in front of them to be tapped into. You can just build and get results so much faster than you've been able to do with any other technology in the past. And I think that's been eye-opening for us and really caused us to change our expectations about how fast we can get a prototype up and running.
Interesting. Yeah, no, I love all those observations. It's and especially the one of the changing dynamic between humans and the tool, right? Like it's not Google, it's an intern.
Yeah.
One of the studies that was recently came out from MIT was fantastic. It showed generative AI can make us like they measured 44% faster and 20% more effective on pretty complicated critical thinking skills, like writing memos from an HR point of view and things. But it also found that 68% of the people use the results, the output of ChatGPT without modification, which is scary, right? Like it shows like a huge gap in the way that people just think, oh, it's like Google, it's always going to give me the answer, which of course we know with hallucinations it's not. So you really put your finger on that. That's really a great way to
Yeah,
think.
we do caution people that um, we caution people that if the thing you're using it for like matters a whole lot, like if the decision that you're using it to help you brainstorm about or to synthesize your thinking or even do research on, to be educated on, if that decision really matters a lot, you need to double check, right? You actually need to double check, just like you would an intern. If you have an intern come in for the summer and you put them on a project, they're going to come back in a few weeks with some initial findings. If it's a really big strategic project, you're going to have somebody double checking some of that work.
Maybe it's another part of your bridge to management that if you can manage the generative AI tool
Hmm,
effectively, that you're also right.
I
Because
like your
really, it is
thinking.
that relationship. It's like, not, you have to check and validate the work, just
Yeah,
like,
it doesn't absolve you of responsibility. That's important. Like we tell people, especially software developers, it can write code for you. It
yeah.
does not absolve you of the responsibility of making sure that that code is quality.
So let's talk privacy, ethical concerns. Of course, my gosh, you hold very sensitive data. You hold my data about shopping.
Yeah,
How do with these concerns and the opportunities on the rise? Obviously, there's a chance to make mistakes. I mean, how do you deal with that? Maybe even get geeky about like how do you manage the privacy of that data to sort of steer the use, particularly of LMs, but of course any application. It's not just generative AI, but like how do you? And by the way, maybe talk about what you touched upon it before, how you integrate these kind of skills with the normal training that you give people. Sort of maybe if you have compliance, you're also now including things like generative AI and awareness of data privacy and security and protection, right? So you also do things, I think, in a pretty progressive way at Target in that way too.
we we take privacy obviously very seriously. Not just because it's the right thing to do, but it's also in a lot of cases the law. And so we like everybody has have to comply with the law, but we also hold ourselves to a high ethical standard just in terms of what we think the right thing to do for our guests are. And we always give our guests the option to opt out of certain um, collection of certain kinds of data. But we take the privacy of our guests very seriously. Um, and we have a responsible AI framework that we have adopted internally that is well documented. On Monday of next week, I have a meeting of our responsible AI governance committee. So we periodically get together, we review major decisions, products that we're building. We sort of run it through that funnel. And there's some very senior people in the organization that help us think through some of the implications of what we might be building or data we might be using. When we train our machine learning models, we strip all of the training data of PII information, personally identifiable information, so as not to have any conscious bias leak into what we do. We will occasionally test the output of models to make sure that there's no unconscious bias, unintentional bias getting worked in. So we take all necessary precautions, um, and and we have, by the way, professionals that are experts in privacy that also are they are just super passionate about that. They're very vocal about that, as they should be. So are some of our technologists, and so all of that sort of influences our thinking. And this is also where having a centralized data sciences organization, a centralized technology organization helps, because there is a place where the center of gravity of those products being built exists. And it's a little easier to develop and enforce and govern certain principles that the organization holds dear. Um, a federated model brings with it certain advantages, but I would say that it probably makes it a little more difficult for organizations that have done that to then govern against a standard. It's not impossible, of course. I'm not suggesting anybody that has federated isn't doing that, but it is more difficult. So I would say a centralized model has helped us figure out who needs to be at the table, and then keep that table relatively small.
Are you tracking any of the public regulations there? Like the EU AI Act is one that I've followed quite a bit. I mean, do you see anything looming there that's kind of getting through some stages to reality? Although it might not be as relevant for Target, but do you see anything happening there that other leaders should be aware of, or things that you track particularly carefully?
We we have a government affairs group that, and one part of what they do is they pay very close attention to legislation that is, making its way through not only at the national level, but individual state levels. And I would say that's always one of the more challenging parts of data privacy landscape, is that there's a patchwork of different regulations in different states, and it can be difficult to navigate, to understand in certain states what you can or are not allowed to do. And then, of course, certain states also give individual people certain rights in which to sort of opt out of certain arrangements with, say, a retailer. And so then we have compliance requirements on what we do with their data, or purging their data. We Because our operations are in the United States, and we don't have operations in Europe, it's not as necessary, probably, as it is for some retailers, for us to pay as close attention to what's going on in the EU. But I will say, I mean, this is opinion of one. This is the opinion of Brad. I think that the EU is one of the more progressive regulatory bodies in terms of thinking through data privacy, thinking long term about how to shape the role of AIs, to make sure the role of AI in society, to make sure it has more of a positive impact than a negative one. And just as a global citizen, I'm a big fan of at least some of the questions that the EU is asking, and the transparency that they're demanding. So that's just an opinion of one. But as a company, because we're so US focused and all of our stores are in the US and we sell in the US, we tend to pay closer attention to what's going on in the United States from a data privacy perspective.
Yeah, I'm a big fan. I didn't intentionally lead the witness, but I couldn't agree more about the EU AI Act. I often say, I talk about this topic a lot with people, and I say, just go read it. It's actually just good reading. It's provocative. It's thoughtful about sort of a framework and something, because it's not just like, okay, here's what you're going to do, rules. It's really guidelines, principles, and very well written for a regulatory document, I suppose. So very very much in alignment on that. Well, let's talk about the 3-2-1. I mean, this is really a great conversation, Brad, and maybe you could take us through maybe three of the big takeaways from like a lot of data leaders, and people getting into data science, and just working with data and analysts and
Sure.
management. So, what are your three big takeaways for those folks? So it's 3-2-1. It's the three
Yeah.
three takeaways, and then the two resources you would suggest people take to a desert island. Doesn't have to be retail or data science or Gen AI oriented, and then your favorite quote that you like to leave us with.
All right, so three takeaways. One is that I think analytics in general is a skill set that is a very wise investment for people to develop, because I think uh, getting more comfortable with data, being a data analyst having an analytical skill set gives you lots of options. You can take that skill set in many different directions. Increasingly, owners of lines of business have to be able to interpret data, use data to make really hard decisions. You can take that into a technology direction where maybe you're working for a technology company that's working on visualizing data or processing data, um, or transforming data. Maybe you want to go into data science. Maybe you want to be a data analyst. There's just so many different directions you can take that. And I think an analyst skill set also helps you become a great storyteller, which is very important in any business. The second takeaway is that retail is a very interesting business vertical in which to do data analytics, data science. There are just so many different touch points with millions and millions of consumers. You've got marketing functions, which has its own sort of use of data science and data analytics. You've got massive supply chain and store operations. So you've got really interesting operations and optimization problems to work on. And then, of course, you've got e-commerce and all of the A/B testing capabilities that come with running an e-commerce operation. So it's really fun to be able to do hypothesis-driven development and have really fast iterations and A/B testing. And then, I guess the third thing I would say is that, I mean, it's not hyperbole, but it's almost cliche at this point to say Gen AI is going to change everything. Um, the e- Even to this day, ChatGPT to me, and I use ChatGPT as an example of the larger availability of Gen AI tools. It could be any of them. It feels like magic sometimes still, even though I've gotten quite used to it over the last year and a half. And what we have today is the worst it's ever going to be. It only gets better and more powerful from here. And so I think it might sound trite to say it, but I really think it's true that Gen AI changes everything. So those are my three things. Uh,
Awesome.
Two resources to take to a desert island. I certainly wouldn't take anything to do with my day job. I like to escape into fiction. I know a lot of uh, people who are in leadership positions at companies like to talk about the nonfiction they're reading and the leadership books they're reading. I go the opposite direction. I'm a big fan of fiction. And so I'm going to take two books. One is, if I'm on a desert island, I need to be reminded of like humanity and people. And so I'm taking a novel called The Power of One by Bryce Courtenay. It is a beautiful novel that takes place in the I think the 40s and 50s in Africa, and it is a story about the impact one individual can have, and it's uplifting and it's beautiful and it's well written. The second one is going to be maybe surprise you. I'm going to take Lonesome Dove, which is a western by Larry McMurtry, and there was a great miniseries many years ago done on it. But I think that the two characters in there, Gus and Woodrow, are two of the most interesting and funny characters. They are both deeply flawed and in their own ways heroic. And I just love the character development that's done in that book. Plus, I love the Wild West as a backdrop. What was the last one? Remind me.
Your
Oh, a quote.
favorite quote to leave us with.
Oh, my memory is so bad. I never remember quotes, but I'll just repeat something I've been saying over and over again inside of Target and to other people when I talk to them about Gen AI, which is that when you're trying to convince people that Gen AI is a thing, if you're talking about it, you're doing it wrong. You need to show them Gen AI. It's only when people see it that they actually sort of the light bulb goes on and do they understand the impact that it's going to have. So if you're talking about Gen AI, you're doing it wrong. You need to be showing.
Eh, Awesome. I love it landing on that question because and I also love the name that Correlation One gave the podcast of Data Humanized because you brought the human back to the data at the end. So that's pretty awesome.
Well,
Hey,
thanks,
Brad.
Mark.
This was great talking. Thanks so much for joining us. And everybody shop at Target. I'm sure I don't have to say that to anybody. You're probably might be listening to be fun. You know what? When I go to Target next, I'm going to put the podcast on and listen to it. That would be
Well,
pretty meta.
I appreciate it, Mark. I appreciate all the questions. Thanks for having me.
Yeah. Thanks a lot. Next, we'll hear from Vitica Arnold. She graduated from Correlation One's Data Skills for All program in 2022.
DS4A has changed my life entirely. I went from not knowing a lick of computer science to knowing how to program in Python and use data science libraries and packages. As a Black woman coming from a psychology background, transitioning into tech was kind of scary. But DS4A built an environment that allowed me to thrive as a woman and as a minority. The mentorship there is unmatched. There's always someone here to help you, whether it's with your extended cases or networking and finding a job after the program. This program has helped me shift my career and my higher education pathway. DS4A is the only learning environment where listening to Erica Badu and Janae Aiko was the norm. These cultural considerations are what made me feel safe to ask questions and to be myself and ultimately to thrive as a new data scientist. I also want to shout out my TA, Scott. He was so helpful and pivotal to my capstone group project and the extended cases. He would always make time for me, whether it was making one-on-one sessions so that we can go over some questions in the extended cases, or making team Zoom meetings so that we can go over our deliverables and see where the holes were in our capstone project. My TA, Scott, was always there for us. He was always someone that we could count on when we were stuck, always had a good attitude, and was just overall happy to be there. I always left a session with Scott feeling excited and motivated and inspired to continue learning data science.
Vitica's story is so compelling. Here are 3 reasons why. First, when Vitica started the DS4A program, she had no programming experience. She had to acclimate to new technology and ideas, and thanks to DS4A's methodology, she was empowered to do so. Second, it was important for Vitica to feel like she belonged. She cited DS4A's focus on inclusiveness as integral for her successful completion of the program, and as a result, access to a brand new career in data science. And then finally, mentorship was critical to Vitica's success. She found inspiration and encouragement from her TA and the rest of the DS4A community. So why does Vitica's story matter? Workers like Vitica need to feel supported and encouraged to expand their skills and deliver value. Enterprise leaders, in turn, must create and develop a structure that enables mentorship, community, and skills expansion. We close with a weekly segment we call The Big Number. We heard from Brad why people are critical to the success of any new technology, like AI, at Target. We also heard from Vitica that when she felt supported, she thrived, gaining new skills and unlocking new career opportunities. What's the common factor here? Well, it's people, of course. So this week, our big number is 36%. That's the number of workers concerned that AI will replace their roles. Despite these exciting advances, we must recognize the impact that these tools have on the workforce. Enterprise leaders must ensure that workers are not only supported and mentored, but also enabled to deliver maximum results from AI via new skills. To do that, we need ubiquitous data literacy. We need data humanized.